Cool. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Critical Minerals in the Arctic, Forging the Path Forward. We're excited to continue yesterday's energizing conversations with the packed schedule today. One housekeeping note real quick. We have 2 lost items. One are AirPods, and second is a key card to the Marriott. So let Wilson Center staff know if you're missing either item. To begin today's first public session, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Mark Green. Ambassador Green is the director and CEO of the Wilson Center, and I'm proud to say he's become an Arctic enthusiast since joining the Wilson Center. He has been a strong proponent of the Polar Institute and of Arctic issues in D.C. and abroad. He previously served as administrator for the U.S. Agency for International Development from 2017 to 2020, and has also served as U.S. Ambassador to Tanzania from 2007 to 2009, as well as 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives representing Wisconsin's 8th District. He holds a law degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Ambassador Green.
Thanks, Jack. Hello and welcome back to the Wilson Center. As Jack mentioned, I'm Center President Mark Green. So the Wilson Center is truly a unique institution in the foreign policy landscape. We're congressionally chartered, we're scholarship driven, and we're fiercely independent and nonpartisan. And as I always say, that special status brings with it special responsibilities. As I remind our team each and every day, we shouldn't duplicate what others do, but instead focus on the most important, the ideas and the issues that truly matter to America's future, and to see where we can add value. And that makes the center the perfect place for today's conference. When we first mapped this project out and its objectives with our great partners, University of Alaska, the Department of Energy's Arctic Energy Office, and the RAND Corporation, we wanted to advance actionable solutions. Everyone knows that critical minerals matter. That isn't in doubt. We see that every day. We don't need to raise awareness. We need to raise answers. The question we need to pose to ourselves and to everyone gathered here is, what does success look like? What does sustainable mineral development in the Arctic look like? Especially with the pressures, environmental, economic, security-based, that we all see. Today's participant list, with nearly a dozen federal agencies, as Becca said, an alphabet soup of federal agencies, 7 universities, an impressive array of industrial leaders, itself, just that attendance is a down payment on answering that question. Our conversations today focused on community ownership of mineral sources and development, financing minerals from ground to market, recruiting the necessary workforces and expertise, a dependable, reliable supply chain of critical minerals. Those are more opportunities for all of us to count on the expertise and knowledge of the experts who are here and find ways to develop nuanced, targeted, necessary policy analysis and plans, action items. To kick off day 2 of the Critical Minerals in the Arctic Conference, I'm honored to introduce to all of you 2 renowned Alaskan leaders. First, Senator Lisa Murkowski, who likely needs no introduction, but she's going to get one anyway. She has tirelessly represented Alaska in the U.S. Senate since 2002, and along the way become the leading advocate of Arctic issues in the U.S. She knows full well the delicate balance between economic growth and environmental preservation, especially pertaining to domestic renewable energies. She's a vitally important voice, and we are lucky that she's able to take time out. We were just discussing her schedule today. I would not wish it on my enemies, what she has to do today in her travels. The fact that she's willing to take time out to come here to talk about these issues shows A, her attention to these issues, and B, how important they truly are. After the senator offers her remarks, she will have a fireside chat with Pat Pitney, president of the University of Alaska System. When President Pitney took on her current role in February of 2022, she already had a quarter century of public service in Alaska. Vice Chancellor of Administration at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, State Budget Director during the administration of Governor Bill Walker, The list could go on and on. Her invitation to the Wilson Center to support the inaugural Alaska Minerals Conference last August in Fairbanks has helped the University of Alaska Wilson Center partnership to blossom, and for that we are truly, truly grateful. This conference builds on her vision and the success of that inaugural conference. And so without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Senator Lisa Murkowski to the stage, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Mark, thank you for the introduction, the opportunity to be back with you at Wilson Center and for your focus on all things Arctic. Now, you said you wouldn't wish my schedule on your worst enemy, but okay, yeah, it's busy. I grant you that. But this afternoon at 1:45, I'm going to Iceland. I mean, seriously. So I don't know. It's you got to scramble to get there, but I have an opportunity to help lead a codel of members to go over there. Senator Schatz from Hawaii is leading the codel, and when we were first talking about doing a trip together, he says, Costa Rica or Iceland? I said, you're from Hawaii. You don't need to go to Costa Rica. I said, you've not been to the Arctic. Everybody says, I'm afraid of the cold. Oh my gosh. So I said, we have got to be working on further education of our colleagues about the Arctic, the promise that it holds, the challenges that it holds. And so as a very frequent flyer to Iceland, there are other places that I could be, but there's a volcano going off and there's just all kinds of great things to do. So I'm happy to be traveling. For those of you who have traveled to be part of this conference, thank you. We appreciate that. I want to recognize and thank President Pitney. Pat has not only led the university extraordinarily well during her tenure here, what she's been able to do of late with the focus on minerals, the importance of minerals, the need for a strong domestic supply of them is so key. So that conference that Mark just mentioned, and how this really has helped to move the needle in the discussion, I think is quite significant. The ambassador mentioned, we've talked a lot about the need. You know the need, or you wouldn't be here. You know what a priority our critical minerals are. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time kind of underscoring all of that. But there are some basics. And I'm going to ask you, this is not for your education, but these are some pretty basic things to take back as you are sharing with other people who might not be quite so engaged, might not be so in tune with why the pressing need for critical minerals right now. Our dependence is growing every day. It is growing in my view, an alarming way. The concentration of the supply that we need, with most minerals coming from just a handful of countries, of course, led by China, adds another dimension to the threat of just our nation's vulnerability. When you rely 100% on somebody else who may or may not be your friend now, that is a weakness. We know the need. The world needs far more minerals, some on the order of 25 or 40 times more than the current use, which means hundreds of new mines on a time frame that, quite honestly, folks, is absolutely impossible under the status quo. Just can't get there. And even if we could produce more minerals here in this country, we don't know what to do with them because we lack the expertise and the infrastructure to process them into advanced minerals. And we know who's doing it. It's China that's doing it. So, you talk about the weakness, the vulnerability. Critical minerals really are our Achilles heel in this country, and we're watching that play out in real time. We just saw the news over the 4th of July out of China a warning shot by announcing export restrictions on gallium and germanium. So, I mean, it's real, and it is present. So there is good news. And I think, again, to the ambassador's point, what are we doing beyond just talking about it? Across both Republican and Democratic administrations, I think you've seen Congress dust off. We've kind of modernized policies that we really haven't touched since the 1980s. We've established a list of critical minerals that are important for domestic use, but are vulnerable to supply disruption. And you might say, well, what good is a list? Well, actually, it does help us, because then it allows us to use other tools for those minerals that are on the list. And Defense Production Act is just an example of that. In terms of legislation, we enacted the entirety of my American Mineral Security Act. That's now in law. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law contains several $billion. Some gentle permitting reforms. We know we need to be doing more, but that's a good step. My friend, Chairman Joe Manchin, added even more for critical minerals through the Inflation Reduction Act on the permitting side. I mentioned the Defense Production Act to cover certain minerals last year, and then we took yet another step on permitting in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So we've been moving, but the reality is that we've just begun to solve for the challenge. We've got a map. We have to fully map our resources. We have to know what we actually have. We have to do more on permitting reform. We just can't nibble around the edges. We have to open more valves of federal support. And I think we're going to have to maybe learn on the fly when it comes to processing and refining. And then equally important to all of these actual policy initiatives, we have got to turn the tide of public opinion. Too often it's either agnostic or it's just downright hostile to mining. So we've got to change this, because we need to get the support for projects. We need to get the support for subsidies and trade protections and whatever else is going to be necessary to establish a more robust U.S. supply chain. And it's a lot of work. But I think for us in Alaska, we recognize that it is an opportunity. There's a challenge. There's a lot of layers there, but it's a great opportunity because we're such a storehouse of these minerals. Every critical and strategic mineral, from cobalt and copper to rare earths and zinc. We've got some great projects underway. I had an opportunity on Saturday to be up in the Nome region and went out to the Graphite 1 mine site. The opportunity there for us to produce graphite. We are producing zero American graphite, natural graphite right now. The vast majority of it is coming from China, of course, and of course the processing is all being done right there. But our opportunity with Graphite 1, which USGS has said is the largest graphite resource in the country, quite possibly bigger than that as we move forward. But when you take into account that we're 100% dependent on imports for natural graphite, and we have the opportunity in a place like Nome, 37 miles outside of Nome, and this is not a new mine. This is a mine that was mined back in the early 1900s by a local family there. So we've seen the resource come out. I wish that I had brought it. It's in the desk drawer on my desk on the Senate floor. But I have a big, it's like the size of a baseball, big piece of graphite that I gave a speech on the floor a couple days ago. And I held it up and I said, I've got a hunk of graphite here from Graphite 1, and here I've got my cell phone. Both of these contain graphite. This hunk here, this crude instrument here, is the only one that is domestic, because this phone doesn't have a bit of domestic graphite in it, as loaded as it is with graphite. So we've got an opportunity there that is really pretty remarkable. I think, and And when you think about Alaska and our strength, everybody thinks about about oil. Everybody thinks about that big elephant field at Prudhoe Bay. Well, I think that minerals could be our next Prudhoe. I think it could be a huge economic engine for our state that can help provide resources that our country needs to compete in this 21st century. But we're also talking about Alaska, unique in many ways, the exception in many others, because it's not easy to reach our resources. We know that. Where else in this country are you going to have to build a 211-mile access road to reach a mining district? Who else has to figure out how you generate power literally hundreds of miles from the nearest grid? So we've got some issues there. We've got to navigate our own distinct land issues, particularly given the significant federal ownership and all of the day-to-day trappings that entails, all the fights over access, the permitting delays, litigation, resource management plans with new restrictions. We've got BLM's proposed conservation rule. So there's a lot in front of us out there. We recognize that. But we've also got to start building this support. We've got to build support from really a very broad constellation of stakeholders, not just the state and the boroughs and the communities, the local residents. We've got half of the nation's tribes. We've got hundreds of Alaska Native corporations who are key to these discussions. So it's never simple up there, but that's why we have to make the strongest case for our ability to lead on mineral development. And so one of the questions that you all are asking yourselves in this conference here over the past couple days is to answer the how. How can we make this unified case for Alaska and for the country? And I think the first part is being here, having conversations just like we're having here. The second is finding partners and allies, probably some in this room here. The third is we've got to showcase our state so that others can see how much we've got to offer and why Alaska is so situated for mineral development. And then fourth, and this is probably the most important, is we've got to make this a sustained effort. We have to build up our state's workforce. We've got to raise up our institutions like the university and its core CM program. We've got to earn this reputation that we're a great place to operate, and we've got to do all of this while things are already in motion. So as the groundwork for federal mineral policy is being laid, we need to use conferences like this to figure out how you harness that policy that's going on here to private sector innovation and investment that's going to benefit our state. So as you're continuing your discussions, I would ask you to just kind of think about what more we can and should do on the federal policy level to promote new projects, advance them into operation, what we can do to assess old core samplings and tailings. We're seeing a lot of innovation there, and that's really kind of exciting to me. What more can we do to locate and reclaim strategic minerals from mining that took place a long, long time ago? We got to look at whether or not we have the right support in place for the infrastructure, the roads, the rails, the ports, the airfields, the power generation. That's usually another part of the Achilles heel that we're talking about in Alaska. But we also need to think about how we can survive dramatically different administrations. You know, you've just got this swing that is just wild. You've got a pro-mineral development administration, and then you move next to some who just aren't. And we've certainly seen that in recent years. We need to have policies that can carry us through that rather than being subject to the political variabilities. And we also need to figure out how we do more to ensure public support for the good projects at every level across our state. So I encourage you to think big. I know you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But bring your ideas to us. Bring them to the delegation. Bring them to the governor, the legislature. I am here. I may be traveling around a lot, but I am here to help because this is too key to Alaska's future. It's too key to our country's future. So we've got a big part to play in it, and I'm anxious to work with you. President Pitney, I'm looking forward to our fireside. I hope to God we're not going to light a fire here because it's too warm outside for us Alaskans.
I didn't even walk. I didn't even walk here because it was.
Oh, you're here.
Let you be in the center.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to follow our assigned
Yeah,
seating.
exactly.
Our assigned
And
seating is
they
here.
say we have to put these up here.
Oh, in case we forget.
In case nobody knows us, I forgot my name tag. Well, thank you for being here. And the fireside chat thing is definitely a Mike Schrager model.
Which we
not,
love.
Not. This is new to me, so.
Oh,
But we so appreciate you being here and kind of leading the charge. You hit on so many of the points that were in the conversations yesterday. But one of the points yesterday that came up was, how do we create the conversation that it's not either mining or animals, or mining and clean water, mining ore. How do we create the conversation that it is mining and environmental safety and health? What can we do in that as we think about having the public, getting past the public resistance? We have public awareness. We know it's important. How do we move past that resistance?
well, it is, I guess these are on, it is indeed a challenge because you have those who come into the conversation with a very preconceived notion as to what mining is. They've seen it in their state. They've seen examples of, quite honestly, bad practices, failure to clean up and remediate, and there is that hangover. But you know what? Alaska's not a stranger to that. We have fought that. We have fought that for as long as I've been around. We have fought to try to establish how in Alaska we're doing it differently when it comes to oil and gas development. That we don't flare our gas, we re-inject it. Our footprint is so small. We have to be able to demonstrate how it is that we do what we do and show that it is different than what people's preconceived notion are. And we've had our own bad examples of mining practices in our state. So, we can't hide from that.
Yeah.
We can't hide from that. So there's a couple things I think we need to do. We need to be just honest with people. People know, there's probably nobody in this room that doesn't know that as lucrative as the Pebble project was, I was not a supporter of the project because I was concerned about how we were going to see potential impact to a watershed. So as one Alaskan who's been super aggressive on mining, I said, I don't think that this is the right place. Pretty tough for a person like me. But it was interesting because it confused people. It's like, wait, I thought that everybody in Alaska wanted to develop anything at any time at any cost. It's like, well, actually, we're pretty good environmental stewards. One of the projects that I like to share with people is we have an existing mine, Greens Creek Mine, outside of Juneau, that has been producing for decades. And it's in a wilderness
It's in
area.
watershed.
Well, it's in, somebody help me out. Yeah, it's on Admiralty Island, right? Mm-hmm. Admiralty Island, and it is designated wilderness around it. And it's extraordinary what they have been doing quietly, working to produce a resource that we need. And so when people appreciate how we've been operating, they can kind of take a step back. It's hard, though. We have the hardest task of anybody because, as we all know, we're too special. We're too special a land to develop any of it, to walk on any of it. The fact that so many of us live there is really an inconvenient fact for some.
Isn't that true? So you noted, and we talked a lot about this kind of stakeholder engagement. Within Alaska, how do you see that coming together of all the parties around this discussion? So Carl Hahnemann mentioned that you kind of, the minerals are where the minerals are.
Yeah.
We have to go to them. How do you see the conversation of drawing stakeholders together within Alaska, and how should we approach that to make sure we have the right engagement? I appreciate both representatives. We have Nana and Doyon here, but it's Native corporations are going to be central to our future in this.
Well, and I think the way that you do it is you make sure that everybody is there. Everybody has to be there. And so, again, it's not only the obvious. You've got your state, you've got your federal agencies. You've got to have your Native corporations. You've got to have your tribes. You've got to have your local input. You've got to have the university. You have to have all of those that are impacted. We've got to get, in order to get the social license to operate, you can't take the approach that we're going to get this plan built and then we're going to show you how good it's going to be. If you bring folks into it early on, if you help explain to them what is going on, if you not only talk about the opportunities for the jobs, but you prove them out early on. A good example is when I was in Nome on Saturday, and we were out at the Nome. There's two camps. There's a base camp there in Nome, and there's one at the field site. And we had gone up. We were first at the base camp and met the woman that had made some snacks. You go on these tours, and I think they think if you go outside, you have to eat 75,000 calories before you go out. So they load you up. But the cook was fabulous, and she was from Nome there. We go up to the base camp, and because we'd been outside for an hour, they had to feed us again. And we were having a discussion, and folks that were part of the exploration team were kind of coming in and out. And there's this one gentleman that kind of perches next to us, and he's eating his soup. And I had asked about the local hire. And John stands up and introduces himself. And he says, I've been the water plant operator in Brevig Mission for like 30 years. He says, I'm good at my job. And he says, I'm now the water plant operator for the facility up here. And he said, this is state of the art. This is amazing. And he said, I thought I knew everything. I came up here and I didn't know a thing. And any other company that's got to have it right would have said, well, okay, we need somebody with experience. We're going to bring him in from outside. They took John and said, we're going to train you up with this extraordinary system. And he says, I am running that facility now. He says, this is the best thing for this facility. It's the best thing for me and my family. He goes back to Brevig Mission, and he's the one that is promoting the benefits of this mine. And so when we talk about stakeholders, we need to think about what it means for the local people to be invested, and not just the cooks and the housekeepers, but train up the local people who have been the resources in these areas. Let's view that as an opportunity, and I think that that really makes a difference.
Good points. Switching back to the federal side. So there's awareness, clear awareness of the importance, and especially in the security space, but just in the economic security space. And we have key federal agencies, Department of Defense, Department of Energy. Within Interior, USGS. They get it. They get the importance of the critical minerals. But then we have real reluctance from other agencies to move things. And sometimes it's on an individual employee's prerogative of moving things or holding up things. Is there a strategy, and is it something like the infrastructure czar? How do we gain interagency cooperation, and how do we gain some incentive for every agency to be part of the solution?
It is a problem because there really is a division, certainly in this administration, between a recognition that we need critical minerals and then how that actually translates into how do we get critical minerals. Because when you remind somebody that you got to mine them, it's like, oh God, I didn't mean that. And so we see that. Department of Defense gets it.
Yeah.
They get it in a big way. And I think Department of Energy understands it and gets it. Interior, don't come on my land. Don't come on federal land. You can go somewhere else. And that's a problem. That's a problem. I think that's one of the reasons why Graphite One is in a relatively better place, because it's on non-federal lands. It's on state lands. And so that would be great if all of our projects didn't have to deal with that. But we can't be in a situation where we just say federal lands are off the table. That just doesn't work. And so again, it goes to my last point that I made when I was addressing the group about how do we put in place policies that transcend administrations so that you don't have this whipsaw effect, that we've made a commitment that we need these resources, we're working our way to them, we're going to put in place good, sound environmental policies so that your concerns about environmental degradation are addressed. We get all that, but it has to be consistent, and it's not consistently applied right now. So one of the things that I've actually been looking at with Chairman Manchin is to establish a point person on minerals within the White House, and you'd certainly want to have the right person in that position, but I think you've kind of got to have, I don't know whether you call him a minerals czar, but you've got to have somebody that is looking at this and saying, all right, we've got all of these really important projects here that we are highlighting as a priority for this administration, whether it's how we advance EVs or how we're going to make sure from a national security perspective we've got the resources that we need out there. So if you had somebody that was more focused on the implementation side of it, in my head, I'm thinking about all that we did within the infrastructure bill. Huge bill with lots of money going out in lots of different directions. Mitch Landrieu is the implementer guy. He's got a more official title than that, but that's kind of what he's charged with doing, so that you don't have to have the Secretary of Transportation or the Secretary of whatever, trying to advance all of this. And I think that an approach like that would be good, but again, the success of that is really going to depend on who you have placed there. If you've got a strong enough person who really understands the vision of why we need to be addressing this vulnerability, and who has the president's authority to then lean on some of these agencies that are perhaps a little more hesitant, a little more recalcitrant to move forward, I think it could help us.
I'm just going to do a quick time check here. We've got time for one more.
Okay?
Okay. The in the permitting reform, again, we have awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have enough awareness, and do we have enough political will in the in Congress to do more than nibbling around the edges on permitting?
Yeah.
And if not, what are some of the key things that have to be part of the dialogue to have the public at a place that the Congress can act?
So, as I mentioned, we've put in place a few key things. I mean, you might not think it's much action, but when we say, look, we're actually putting a timeline on when how long your EA or your EIS is going to take. That's a big deal. Page limit, we pat ourselves on the back. We're going to give you a page limit here, but they are steps that I think actually contribute towards a better process. But part of our problem right now is, again, whether it was through the American Mineral Security, the infrastructure bill, the IRA, we've put some things in place, but they're not being implemented. Right? That's a problem. So we're kind of in this suspended animation place. We've passed some of these provisions into law, but you haven't seen the administration fully implement them. So I think there is certainly a lot of appetite to do more. On the Republican side, we want limits on judicial review. We'd like to see some reforms to statutes, whether it's endangered species. On the Democrat side, they want to continue to promote transmission. So when you look at some of the key priorities, you think, all right, is there any overlap here? I continue to think that there is, because of the many conversations that I am engaged in. Just yesterday on the floor, you walk through a huddle of folks, and we're all talking about permitting. What more do you think we can move? How can we work to continue to advance it? I know at the committee level, these discussions are taking place. So I think people should be encouraged that that we haven't ended the conversation, because we operate in a venue and in a forum in the Senate where once you've passed a bill, all right, check that box. We don't need to go back to that for another 5 years or so. And so that was a real concern that many of us had with kind of a lesser permitting bill, lesser than wholesale reform, was that will we ever get to come back to it? But we are all, I mean, when I say all, it's a very interesting coalition of members. I used to be part of the Lonely Caucus talking about permitting reform. Dan Sullivan was a great leader on this in his committees, but we'd talk about it, and it's like, it's just those of us in like basically oil and gas and mining states that we're talking about permitting reform. We turned the corner on that within this administration, where all of a sudden, they've got a very aggressive agenda when it comes to building out renewables, when it comes to building out EV infrastructure, and they've realized, in order to get what I want, I have to have somebody sign off on these permits. So the first conversation that I had with a colleague, and I'm not going to name names, but he's very intent on building out some offshore wind. And he says, he comes up to me, Lisa, we've got to do something on permitting reform. Do you realize how long it takes to get a permit? I said, yes, welcome to
Been
my
there.
world. And so there is a coming together where we may be coming at it for different ends in terms of the projects, but there is an alliance there that we have not had. And I think when I look at those that are part of the conversation now, I do have hope for greater reforms that will be more substantive than just the nibbling around the edges.
Excellent. So one final question. Our job is to create a set of recommendations, actionable steps. In this area, what would be most useful from this group to come to you where we are pushing a particular recommendation agenda? What would that look like?
Well, because I'm sitting with the president of the University of Alaska, I'm going to tell you, I need workforce. We need workforce. Where we've got the resource, we've all acknowledged that. We're working on policies that's going to help build them out. But I worry about the availability of a trained, skilled workforce. And I'm not just talking about the geoscientists out there. We need people that can move truck and do the core samples. When I was talking with these young operators that were up in Nome, great young guys. I mean, like young, 25. They're not from Alaska. Why can't we be taking those core samples there?
Yeah.
And I look at that, and again, I think how do we change public opinion? Because the public opinion of mining is still, it's this gritty, dirty, really hard work. And it is not easy. It is not for everybody. But the technology that we're seeing in mining is extraordinary nowadays from where it once was. And so any young person who wants to be in high tech, why wouldn't you want to be part of this world? But we're going to have to remind Alaskans and people all around this country that mining is good work, it's honorable work, it is work that the country needs, and that's my ask of you as a state leader, is we need a workforce.
That will be part of it.
Good.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a good morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, President Pitney. Can we get another quick round of applause for our great panel? Thank you. It's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Tingstad up to the stage for a quick readout from yesterday's TTX. We are going to get back on schedule by cutting a little bit of time out of our lunch slot. So we'll take a break after this, and we'll kick off our working session at 10:15. I'll remind you of the schedule once we're all done here, but rest assured we'll get back on schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Abby, thanks.
Well, thank you so much. We are grateful for the opportunity to partner with the Wilson Center and the Polar Institute, the University of Alaska, and the Arctic Energy Office in this endeavor, this entire conference, and also in the tabletop exercise, which we ran yesterday with many of you here in the room today, which I'm going to give a brief readout from now. So the objective of yesterday's tabletop was to help initiate focus on some concrete options for identifying opportunities and mitigating risks in scenarios where critical mineral supplies are further developed in Alaska in the coming decades. So the tabletop format followed what we called a 360 approach. in which we examine risks and opportunities through multiple lenses, which in this case included communities and the environment, infrastructure, supply chains, financing, and workforce. A very good topic, just given Senator Murkowski's last answer to the last question there. We had roughly 45 in-person participants across 6 breakout sessions, each focused on one of the lenses I just mentioned. And we used a scenario-based approach to look forward into the future about 2 decades and say, so what about this future seems promising? What about this future seems concerning? And now let's back up, rewind, and take the next 2 decades and think, what can we achieve in the next 2 decades to take best advantage of those opportunities and to mitigate the risks that seem concerning in those futures? So, I mean, the real idea was to say we need to look at the problems and the opportunities, and then we need to say, okay, given that, what do we need to do specifically? So we'll be writing up the summation and findings from that tabletop discussion, but for now I will leave you with a flavor of some of the interconnected ideas that were broadly discussed across breakout groups, and these do mirror some of the themes that Senator Murkowski mentioned, as well as the broader discussion we've been having here yesterday within our working groups and such. So there was definitely an affirmation of needs that I think many of us are already aware of. For example, establishing mechanisms for dialogue and co-production early on with communities, and also considering critical mineral supplies in the broader context of ensuring access to livelihoods, energy, education, and mobility on an enduring basis. That is, critical minerals could be one nucleus around which to build long-term opportunities and prosperity, but not to stand alone, and also not to proceed without mitigation of multiple risk factors. We also heard about a lot of priorities to examine in the solution space, if you will. We had a lot of discussion about fundamental research needs to even understand what is out there. We already have examples of cores, for example, that have been taken, or previous mining activities that could help inform what the future may hold as well. But there was also discussion about needing to better understand equities among multiple stakeholders early in the process. We discussed mapping exactly what would be required to take on specific projects, going in with eyes wide open kind of dialogue, really understanding what it would take, what the problems would be, what the opportunities would look like, and considering this specifically in the ways in which Alaska is a unique environment in every sense of that word, and specifically exploring infrastructure, local workforce development, incentives, and financing options for market stability to avoid peaks and valleys. On the subject of technology, that came up frequently during the discussions during the tabletop yesterday, and it was discussed in a variety of different ways, from using AI tools to assist with geological mapping, to improving the efficiency of supply chains in a variety of different ways, to enabling education, including local workforce education, and also to developing technologies that would not only benefit Alaska, but would potentially provide something that Alaska could bring to the rest of the country and the rest of the world as something to export, if you will, a capability to export, if you will. And then finally, there was a lot of encouragement of further public discussion and education, something that Senator Murkowski also had mentioned. And I think we had some very creative ways of doing that, including, but not limited to, a reality TV series, which I'm very excited to watch one day. Perhaps some areas to pull the threads on a little bit further in future discussions, maybe not as thoroughly covered yesterday, would include the permitting processes and environmental impact assessments and evaluations, modes of exchanging dialogue with local communities and other stakeholders, specifically the means of doing so, what is the most appropriate ways of exchanging information, and then also international engagement and collaboration. So in conclusion, the issues surrounding critical minerals, as we all know, are not going away anytime soon, so I'm confident that there will be much more dialogue on this to come. But importantly, this tabletop and conference in general has really raised the issue that though problems and concerns and maybe broad visions of the future are certainly important to discuss and lay out there, it's also really critical to move that conversation forward to look specifically at, okay, how do we specifically get there? How do we realize the potential and how do we mitigate the risks? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abby. All right, great. We are going to move to a brief break now. So it's 10:05. We are 20 minutes late, which is totally fine. We will take a break until 10:20, and then we will start working the second round of working sessions. As a reminder, we'll have 2 rooms. So the boardroom across the foyer here, we'll have our financing session. And then downstairs in the 5th floor conference room, we will have our workforce session. The moderators for financing are myself and Rick in the back of the room right there. Thank you very much. And then our workforce moderators are Erin and Mike, who is AWOL, but we'll chase him down in the next 20 minutes. Oh, there he is. Excellent. We will run the working sessions from 10:20 until probably about 12:15 or so, and then we will have lunch. Lunch will be set up in the room across the foyer here, and we'll be eating at large in the dining room, so that's an open session. It's not a working lunch today, which is nice. And then at 1:15, we'll move back into, we'll get back on schedule, and we'll have a panel on critical minerals in the North American Arctic. As a reminder, restrooms are down the hall, also 1 floor down. We have snacks and refreshments set up out there. Please feel free to grab a granola bar since we're pushing lunch back a little bit later. And again, if you have any questions, if there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable, just let us know. We are in the midst of replenishing our coffee. I know that is everyone's top priority, and we should have some fresh brewed coffee available shortly. If there's anything else we can do, just let us know. Thanks so much.